Hi. After defeating his archenemy, Megamind feels empty and tries to create a new hero to face him, but the Chosen One turns into a supervillain, forcing him to betray his own beliefs to defend the city. Today we will recap the story of the 2010 movie, Megamind. In a distant part of the galaxy, Megamind's home planet is being destroyed, forcing his parents to put him in a space capsule so he can save himself. Before little Megamind leaves, his parents give him Minion, an alien fish that will be in charge of him, and then launch the two of them into the middle of space. By coincidence, another baby alien is also leaving his planet and together they fly to Earth, where Megamind was to crash land in the mansion of a wealthy family, but at the last second, the other capsule hits his, taking his place and causing the blue alien to land in the middle of the prison. Because of this, while Megamind spent his childhood being raised by prisoners, who taught him everything about crime, the other baby spent his childhood being spoiled and given everything he wanted. Yet even in his childhood, Megamind already had his super intelligence, which allowed him to build super complex objects with devastating power. As he nears adolescence, Megamind is released for good behavior to attend the local school, where he bumps into that other alien, who is adored by everyone because of his flying abilities and super strength. Moved by the envy he felt for his rival, Megamind decides to show that he also has impressive abilities, but all his attempts to surprise his classmates go wrong and he ends up scaring them, being considered a villain by all of them. In one of the numerous times he is grounded, Megamind gives up trying to be adored by everyone and assumes his role as a villain, but this does not stop him from continuing to develop his abilities, creating a weapon capable of dehydrating animated objects, making them tiny and then rehydrating them to their normal form. With Megamind destined to be Metro City's greatest villain, and Metro Man destined to defend it, the two super aliens become eternal rivals and spend their entire lives battling. As an adult, Megamind is placed in a special cell, where he is constantly visited by the prison warden to make sure he has not escaped. In another of these visits, the villain tries to convince him that he is already changed and ready to return to society, but the director ignores him and says that he will always be a bad person. Soon after, the man says that a gift has arrived for him from Metro Man, a watch with a note that jokes that Megamind has 85 life sentences. Since he finds the watch beautiful and wants to provoke the villain, the director decides to keep the object and puts it on his wrist, but it was all just a trap. It turns out that this watch is one more of the villain's inventions, which makes the director look like Megamind. So when he is walking down the corridor, some of the guards see him and, thinking he is the supervillain, capture him and take him back to his cell. Taking advantage of the moment, Megamind escapes and imprisons them all. Finally free, the villain uses the watch to assume the warden's appearance and is able to leave the prison freely. Downtown, Minion captures the journalist Roxanne, Metro Man's girlfriend who works as a reporter. After this, he picks up Megamind with the invisible car, and together, they drive back to the hideout. The blue-headed man puts on his supervillain costume and meets up again with his brainbots, dozens of little robot dogs that he has created to help him with his research. After making sure that everything is in order, Megamind realizes that Roxanne has regained consciousness and takes her to the hostage room where he tries to frighten her, but since she has been captured dozens of times before, the woman doesn't care and says that everything is very predictable. When Megamind realizes that she is not impressed by any of his traps, he decides to stop wasting time and starts to execute his plan, which consists in using the reporter to blackmail Metro Man. At the opening of the museum in his honor, the superhero starts showing off his powers to win over the audience and gives a rather generic speech before cutting the ribbon with his heat vision, but as soon as his statue is unveiled, a dark fog covers the entire city. In the middle of all that gloom, the villain appears on a big screen and starts heckling Metro Man while being booed by the crowd. To blackmail him, Megamind shows that he has Roxanne and says that he will only release her if the superhero leaves town, but the woman ruins his plan by revealing that she is in the abandoned observatory. Since there is only one in the whole city, Metro Man leaves the event and starts flying to the place, but Roxanne finds it strange that the villain is too happy and Megamind reveals that they are actually in a fake observatory that he himself created. Not far from there, Metro Man finally arrives at the abandoned place and immediately realizes that there's something strange. Because, besides not finding Roxanne, he realizes that he has landed on a huge target in the shape of an X. At this point, Megamind orders the Minion to activate the Death Ray to annihilate his enemy, but before he does, he starts a video call to brag about his victory. While everyone watches, Metro Man and the supervillain keep poking each other until Roxanne tells them to get it over with, but Megamind says that she can only leave if Metro Man can withstand the power of his lightning. At this point, he yells at Minion to fire the laser and waits for the explosion, but the assistant says that the weapon is still heating up. Quite embarrassed, Megamind orders the minion to release Roxanne and starts to leave the place, but just as his assistant is about to make her pass out, the villain realizes that Metro Man is still trapped in the observatory, because according to him, the copper weakens his powers. The beam finally finishes charging and is launched straight at the observatory, exploding everything on impact. At the base, Megamind watches apprehensively, until after a while, a figure comes flying out of the smoke. Thinking it was Metro Man, the supervillain becomes desperate and tries to escape, but is shot by the hero soon after. After the impact, Megamind lifts his cape and realizes that what actually hit him was only the skeleton of the Metro Man. Both the villain and the people watching on the big screen cannot believe that Metro Man has finally been defeated. After the initial shock, Megamind celebrates the victory by declaring himself as the new owner of the city. After this, he goes to the center where the entire population is gathered and makes his reign of evil official, taking over the White House and embarking on an endless crime spree. But since no one dares to stand up to him, things start to lose their fun. In this way, Megamind begins to have existential crises, wondering what he is going to do from now on. But since his greatest enemy is dead, not even the idea of capturing Roxanne excites him anymore. Moved by grief, the villain goes to the Metro Man Museum and begins to apologize to his statue, saying that he always wanted to eliminate him, but never thought he could. Finally, he throws the bouquet of flowers he brought up together with the activator for a bomb, saying that he will destroy the museum because this place brings back painful memories, but as he is leaving, the villain is met by Roxanne and has to run so that he is not seen in his pajamas. While on the run, he bumps into one of the museum employees and decides to use the watch to assume his form, as well as dehydrating him with the laser gun. With less than 2 minutes to go until the explosion, the villain goes to the elevator and starts to ride down together with Roxanne, who, thinking he is the employee Bernard, tries to make small talk while Megamind, in disguise, laments the loss of the Metro Man. Before they say goodbye, Roxanne tells Bernard to rest assured that good will always come up against evil and that heroes can be created. Which gives the villain a great idea. Inspired by what she said, Megamind watches the museum explosion up close and returns to his hideout, planning to create a new hero using the rest of the Metro Man's DNA left on the cover. When he arrives at the place, he tells about his plans to the minion, who warns his boss that this was a bad idea, but the villain says that this is what villains do, bad things. After preparing everything, Megamind puts the DNA sample into an injector gun and starts thinking about how to find someone with a noble heart to be his new rival, but suddenly a cell phone starts ringing and he realizes that it is Bernard's. When he answers, the villain hears Roxanne on the other end of the line, thanking him for the conversation the other day and suggesting that they get together to face Megamind, because now she knows where his hideout is. The minion shows the villain that Roxanne is at the entrance to the hideout and he panics, wondering how she found the place, but since he forgot to dismantle the fake observatory, it was quite easy. Roxanne sees the rug of the secret entrance that the minion has left and decides to enter to investigate the hiding place. With his secrets about to be discovered, Megamind decides to transform into Bernard and goes to meet with Roxanne to try to convince her to leave, but the reporter decides to continue investigating and finds all the projects that the villain is developing. To prevent his plans from being ruined, Megamind asks the minion to send the brainbots to take Roxanne away, but instead, they get the minion himself, who is disguised as Bernard, forcing the villain to return to his original form. As soon as the robots release the blue alien, Roxanne finds Megamind and starts threatening him with the injector gun, while asking where Bernard is. Knowing that he cannot lose Metro Man's DNA, the villain says he will bring him back and jumps into the basement, where he forges a fight against the man. As soon as the performance is over, Megamind tries to take the launcher out of Roxanne's hands, but the reporter insists on keeping the weapon, forcing the villain to hide so he can return to his original form and try to take it by force. As they fight, the object ends up shooting and hitting Hal, Roxanne's cameraman, who had accompanied her there. After this, the journalist hides from the villain and decides to get out of there, but ends up in a crocodile trap, having to be saved by Megamind disguised as Bernard. Now the brainbots are chasing them again, and Roxanne forces the villain to throw dynamite at his own creations so that they can escape, but they also almost get hit by the explosion. Outside, Roxanne begins to praise Bernard's courage in facing Megamind, but the moment is ruined by Hal, who gets jealous when she gives the villain a farewell hug. Since Hal still doesn't know what happened, Megamind asks the minion to get the car so they can follow them and get Metro Man's powers back. But seeing what a complete failure the cameraman is, the villain gets carried away believing it was fate and decides to leave him with the powers. With this in mind, they break into the apartment and wait until the transformation happens. After Hal completely changes his appearance, Megamind disguises himself as an old man and pretends to be his father in order to train him until he becomes a real hero, but Hal is a complete failure at everything they try. Tired, Megamind becomes convinced that the boy is useless and thinks about removing his powers, but the minion starts to think of a new training method while the villain is busy texting Roxanne and going on dates with her. During the outings that take place more and more frequently, they begin to get very close, and Megamind starts to put an end to everything that bothers Roxanne, such as the garbage strewn about town and even returning stolen items. At the same time, Minion's new tactics really work and Hal begins to progress, reaching the end of his training and receiving both his uniform and his superhero name, Titan. With one day to go until the first big confrontation between Megamind and the new superhero, Minion begins to make some adjustments to his battlesuit, but instead of focusing on the confrontation, the supervillain is more concerned with hanging out with Roxanne. Knowing that he is in love and afraid that his friend will get hurt when Roxanne discovers his true identity, Minion refuses to let him leave and takes the car key. Disgusted with this attitude, the supervillain starts a big argument where he admits that maybe he doesn't want to be evil anymore, since the villain never gets the girl. In the middle of the fight, Megamind ends up saying that he no longer needs the minion and so he leaves. Across town, Roxanne is trying to decipher the papers she saw in Megamind's hideout, and ends up finding the word, Titan. While she wonders what this could mean, Hal appears in costume behind her and introduces himself as the Titan himself, trying to impress her and call her for a ride, but he picks her up before she can even respond. With Roxanne completely helpless, Hal starts playing with her, releasing her into the air and throwing her off buildings just so he can save her, which leaves her quite frightened. Finally, she manages to convince him to put her down and demands to know who he is. So he finally reveals his true identity and hopes that she will see him differently from now on, starting to talk about a possible relationship between the two, but even though she is scared, Roxanne makes it clear that there is not the slightest chance of the two of them ending up together, which makes him leave indignantly. Even with all the fuss, Roxanne goes to meet Bernard and tells him about her theory that Megamind has made a new superhero to have someone to stand up to. To keep his cover, the supervillain pretends to be surprised by the revelation, but suggests that they enjoy the moment, instead of talking about the Megamind's plans. Roxanne then focuses on her date and they spend a very pleasant evening, until they begin an exchange of glances before kissing. It turns out that at the time of their first kiss, Roxanne ends up messing with Megamind's watch, causing him to revert to his original form. As soon as she realizes this, the woman pushes him away while Megamind tries to explain himself. But she is indignant and leaves the restaurant alone in the rain. Heartbroken, the supervillain goes after her with his invisible car and tries once again to apologize, but Roxanne says there is no chance they will ever be together. Completely disappointed, Megamind walks back to his base where he tries to apologize to the minion, but since he has left, the villain decides to focus on the one thing that he is really good at, being bad. The next morning, Megamind puts on his new costume and goes out with his giant robot to confront Titan, but after waiting all day for the hero to show up, he decides to go to his apartment, where he finds Hal playing video games next to a pile of stolen money. When Megamind sees this, he demands an explanation and Hal tells him that he had only agreed to become a hero to win Roxanne, but since she doesn't care at all about him, the Titan thinks it's better if they ally to take over the world. Upon hearing this, the big blue man is extremely disappointed and reveals the whole truth, telling that he was the one who granted Hal his powers and even pretended to be Bernard to conquer Roxanne. All this provocation causes the Titan to finally confront him, going up to the robot and knocking him to the ground, but Megamind soon manages to recover and return the blow, causing Hal to sink to the asphalt. Then the blue alien hides and lands a surprise blow on Titan, throwing him against a building, which makes him even angrier. Completely enraged, Hal grabs a pole and they begin a fencing match, until he manages to melee upwards and, still high up, lands another blow that sinks him to the ground, completely destroying the robot. After the defeat, the big-headed alien says that this was a great battle and asks the Titan to take him to prison like Metro Man did, but instead, Hal prepares his heat vision and says that he will send him straight to the cemetery. Desperate, Megamind presses the robot's emergency button, which causes it to be ejected from the back. As he is falling, the villain calls for help from the brainbots who save him at the last second, but even so, Hal continues to follow him and ends up hitting a fuel truck that blows up the tunnel, throwing everyone away. From the midst of the flames, Titan comes flying at Megamind and prepares to deliver the final blow, which forces his opponent to activate his emergency protocol, trapping Hal in a copper sphere. It turns out that, despite having the same powers as Metro Man, Titan does not have the same weaknesses and is immune to copper, which leaves Megamind completely at a loss when Hal throws the sphere at him. Seeing someone standing up to the blue villain, The mayor of the city thanks the Titan while celebrating, thinking the city is safe, but Hal throws him away, saying he will now take over. As a last resort, Megamind goes to Roxanne's house and tells her that the Titan has succumbed to evil while begging for help to save the city. After the reporter accepts, Megamind asks if she knows where Metro Man's hideout was, because according to him, maybe then they can find the Titan's weakness. Thus, they leave for a fortress that belonged to Metro Man, and halfway there, Roxanne suggests that Megamind simply get his powers back, but he explains that the weapon to do this is in the invisible car, which he lost after she abandoned him at the restaurant. After the explanation, they finally arrive at the hiding place. The place outside was simply the old school where they studied as children. As soon as they enter the fortress, the two begin to explore the place, and Roxanne sees a glass with some ice cubes in it on the table. As they wonder how it is possible for the ice to still be intact, Metro Man appears behind them, alive and wearing a robe. When they see the former hero before their eyes, the two think it is some ghost and ask him to explain himself. Trapped, Metro Man says he was tired of living to help others and wanted his freedom, but since he couldn't just give up, he decided to pretend that copper was his greatest weakness. So when Megamind's beam hit him, he took the opportunity to grab a skeleton from the nursing school, put on his cape, and throw it in the direction of the fake observatory. Although he understands his feelings, the supervillain tells him about the Titan and asks for help to defeat him. But Metro Man refuses, saying that maybe it's time for Megamind to discover his true calling. Roxanne buys the idea and begins to devise a plan to take the new villain by surprise, but Megamind does not seem convinced of his own potential for good and decides to turn himself into the authorities. Meanwhile, reporters talk about the devastating situation the city is in and that the few citizens who have decided to stay must remain at home. Nevertheless, Roxanne is in the center of the metropolis and tries to convince the Titan to go back to being the same old Hal, but he says it's too late now. In prison, Megamind is going through the channels when he comes across Titan calling him for a reckoning for the life of Roxanne. To save her, the big-headed man apologizes and begs the director to release him, saying that the city doesn't deserve to pay for his mistakes. At that moment, the minion who was impersonating the director undoes the hologram and accepts his apology, freeing him so they can defeat the Titan. Downtown, Hal starts tearing down the skyscraper that Roxanne is tied up in when Megamind makes a triumphant entrance, saying that he may even be a villain, but he will never be super. Angered, Titan attacks Megamind, who dodges him and sends his brainbots to chew him up. Meanwhile, he takes his spaceship to Roxanne and drops it from the free-falling tower. After getting rid of the brainbots, Hal catches the skyscraper in midair and throws it at the couple, hitting the ship that loses control. To try to save his beloved, Megamind throws Roxanne into an awning before the worst happens, but he ends up getting hit. After getting up, the reporter sees that the villain has been hit and tries to run to see if he is okay, but Hal arrives just in time and throws a bus at her, but the vehicle is broken in two just before the collision. In front of Roxanne, Metro Man appears and apologizes for leaving the city. So the hero faces the Titan and manages to chase him away without having to deliver a single blow. The journalist then takes the opportunity to see if Megamind is okay, but as soon as she approaches, the villain reveals that he is actually the minion in disguise. Yes guys, that Metro Man is actually Megamind transformed. Meanwhile, the fake Metro Man continues chasing the Titan and manages to make him promise to leave the city and never return, but when he comes back to the ground, Roxanne takes his hand and deactivates the clock, revealing to everyone that this is in fact Megamind. Only this is nowhere near their biggest problem, because the Titan sees everything. Out of options, Megamind tries to hit him, but since he can't do any damage, he decides to focus on defense, deflecting the enemy's laser beams. At that moment, Roxanne realizes that one of the beams hits the invisible car and remembers that the diffuser gun is inside. In this way, she gets Megamind's attention and asks him to look behind him, instantly understanding her plan. With this in mind, the villain tries to fly his jetpack to the car, but since the object is hit by the laser, he must crawl to the car. Luckily, while he is in the middle of the road, Megamind is reached by the Titan, who throws him right into the side of the vehicle. He then enters the invisible car and turns on the diffuser gun. But before the weapon has even warmed up, Hal pulls Megamind out of it and hurls him high into the air, sending him into a free fall. Just when he thinks all is lost, the supervillain remembers that he has his dehydration weapon and decides to use it on himself, cushioning his fall completely and appearing in front of the Titan just as he tries to attack Roxanne. At the last second before being hit by heat vision, Megamind takes the diffuser and shoves it right up Hal's nose, thereby removing all his powers and finally defeating him, as well as giving him a nice nasal cleanse. After the victory, Megamind is applauded by the entire city and becomes the new defender of Metro City, gaining a museum of his own, while Metro Man watches from the crowd. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, please like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.